let's say hello and welcome to Peter. Thank you so much for saying yes to our invitation.
Hello, and it's good to talk to you, and great to speak to everybody who's out there watching right now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Peter. And I love the title of your presentation, which is kind of like very challenging for some people. It's like, I'm challenging you. So you think you know about meta models. So please tell us, what is the meta model, and how should we interpret this? Because many people heard about the meta model. Many people think they know what meta model is, but I'm sure that you'll come up with some very interesting angles on this. So please enlighten us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So Metamodel is the foundation of NLP. NLP, some purists would say, is Metamodel because Metamodel is the process, the mechanism through which we create NLP. So what we know as practitioner techniques, for example, these are the results of NLP. They're not NLP in themselves. They are the result of the modelling process, and the heart of the modelling process is Metamodel, which is the analysis of the structure of experience and therefore the structure of communication. And so I think a lot of people will have heard the idea that in the first minute, your client who you're working with, whether you're a coach, a therapist, leader, manager, salesperson even, the client's told you everything you need to know within the first minute. And some people think, well, that's an outrageous claim. That can't be true, because we need all of this information, we need all the stories, and the client just wants to talk and talk. Actually, the client's told you everything you need to know before they even open their mouths, if you're really paying attention. So just imagine what you could do with that kind of knowledge. Imagine the power, the flexibility that such knowledge would give you as a coach or as a practitioner of NLP. And imagine what your clients would say when you reveal their innermost fears, their desires, which they think they have never shared with anyone. And something I hear very often from clients is they'll say, wow, you've said the exact phrase that I've been saying to myself in my head for years. And I've never
told anyone about it.
Yeah, and I've never said it out loud to anybody, but you've hit the nail on the head. And it's an incredible moment very early on in the conversation when the client says, that's exactly it. You've put it better than I could put it. You've hit the nail on the head. You've summed it up perfectly. And all that I'm doing is, of course, I'm listening and reflecting back the structure that they are giving me without realizing it in everything that they do. And
Let me ask you something here, because you said something very, very interesting, which kind of like could go under the radar, but so you actually are listening to the structure of what they are saying, not necessarily to what they are saying, but to the structure of what they are saying.
Right, and the whole basis of NLP is that the work that we do is content free, that the stories the client tell are carriers for structure, but it's the structure that we're interested in, and it's the structure that we're looking to change, because we can't change the content. The content is stuff that has already happened, but we can change the structure of experience. This is one of the presuppositions of NLP. This is one of the first things that everybody who learns NLP should be learning. Essentially it's easier to change the structure of our experience of reality than it is to change the content, because by the time you know the content, it has already happened. But what you do have the opportunity to do is change the structure that you use to make meaning of that experience, and then that changes your perceptions and so on. And I think many trainers trivialize or they gloss over Metamodel at practitioner level, or they turn it into just a set of fact-finding questions, coaching questions. And I know a lot of trainers I've met, they don't even train Metamodel at all. I would have to be harsh and say mainly because they don't understand it themselves.
Yeah.
Even Bandler, and whether you love or hate Bandler, he said that if you know Metamodel, you can work out all of the practitioner techniques, processes, because that's how they were created. And even something like sleight of mouth, which is a nice kind of handy off-the-shelf set of interventions, it's a repackaging of Metamodel. So if you know Metamodel, you don't need sleight of mouth, and you don't need to remember and figure out those patterns.
So in your words, if you were to describe or like to give the definition of Metamodel, what would you say that is?
It's a mechanism for decoding the structure of a person's reality.
Perfect.
And if we said that every problem that a human being encounters in life is caused by a mismatch between their individual subjective reality and we can't have an objective reality, but at least an alternative or a reality that's perhaps generally accepted by other people. So everyone's had the experience of being in a meeting, coming out thinking a certain agreement was made, and then other people act like that's the first they've heard of it. And you think, well, were you at the same meeting? How could you not have heard what I heard? So we know that people get into mental health issues, anxiety, stress, worry, turning, what's this person going to think of me? What did this person mean when they said this to me? And just turning those ideas round and round in their heads. And people will say, you've got it out of proportion, or you've misunderstood, or you're worrying about nothing. But fundamentally what that person is doing is reinterpreting their subjective reality to match their fears.
So basically they're taking the information from the client, let's say, and they match it to their own map rather than reading or getting what the client actually has as a map for himself.
Right. And often we talk about the map like it's the result of some process that's taken place, a result of some sensory filtering, but the map is the sensory filter. The map isn't something we end up with after receiving life experience. The map is life experience, and it is the lens, the filter through which we judge and determine current and future life experience. So the map becomes self-reinforcing. And Metamodel is the basis of modelling, and modelling is the process of decoding and systemizing how a person takes in some sensory data that's available and processes it, and that generates behavior that gets outstanding results, and that's always in a given context or situation. So as the basis of we're modeling, whether we are modeling to understand a talent that somebody has, which is what I do a lot of in my corporate consulting work, or whether we're working with a client to bring about some process of change. Both of those we do through modelling, rather than, and I think this is one of the hallmarks of the NLP generative approach. Somebody's talking about a problem that they've got, something they're labelling as a problem, and instead of saying, oh dear, how terrible for you, how awful, we've got to solve this problem, we're saying, wow, that's amazing that you can do this thing without thinking about it any time. How cool. That you can worry about public speaking or presenting and then work yourself up into such an anxiety that you end up just phoning in sick and then you don't have to do it. What a brilliant way of getting out of doing presentations at work. There are probably easier ways, but it's still very clever. And so the modelling approach, whether we are modelling replicating talents or whether we are bringing about change, is exactly the same. It's here's something amazing that this person does. And first we've got to understand what's the interface between this person and the outside world. Because the outside world only exists as a result of our sensory systems. It doesn't exist independent of us, it exists because of us. And when we have a very different experience of that reality to other people, that's when we get into problems and interpersonal conflicts and worry and anxiety and the kind of things that then result in somebody coming to you the viewer and saying, can you help me with this problem, or I want to make this change in my life, or whatever it might be. And a lot of people, I've heard a lot of people say, but what's the point of analysing language? Language is so limiting. It's such a limited way. The client's communicating through their body. And so don't limit yourself to working with language. Well, it's hard to believe, but the person's mouth and larynx are actually part of their body. And they are one of the ways through. So when I'm talking about metamodel analysis, I'm actually not just talking about language, but also modelling the person's entire communication system, because the person's body is an entire communication system.
This reminds me of somebody was saying, how can I move objects with my mind? And I said, well, reach out your hand, because that's how you do it. You know, with your mind, you stretch your hand, pick up the object, and that's how you do it, with your mind.
Exactly right, yeah, exactly. And so there are other ways that we can decode the structure of a person's experience. So there's something called projective coaching. That's one of my books, Projective Coaching Techniques. Projective coaching is using non-verbal methods to interact with a client. Could be any one of a number of things, and projective techniques have been commonly used in psychology and psychotherapy for decades, and so that's an approach to bring those into coaching. But we can't get away from the fact that the brain itself is a symbolic machine. We're not, the very essence of NLP is that we are interacting with this fictional outside world through our subjective senses. And our subjective senses, our brain, is producing a symbolic map, and we're interacting with that map, not with the outside world. This is the essence of NLP. So we can't get away from that if we're going to talk about doing change work or coaching with NLP. So whether those symbols are recognizable as words or something else, it's still a symbolic language that we're using to interact with the outside world. And if we can start to decode that, if as the coach or the practitioner, we can put ourselves in between the client's reality and the outside reality. That's not to say, as the coach, well, I know what the real world is like and you, the client, are wrong. It's not that at all. But if the client themselves is reporting that they feel kind of out of sync with the reality that other people are talking about, then they are becoming aware that there's that misalignment is taking place. And any self-correcting system, whether it's you, a human being, or air conditioning or cruise control in your car, any self-correcting system, if we disconnect feedback, it will just run on in its own direction. If it's designed well, it will fail safe. And it will end up in a position that's kind of a default safe position. Well, the human brain is an extremely complex self-correcting system, but it's built the same way. So if we can understand what that system is doing, what feedback it's incorporating, what it's correcting for, what rules is it using to do that, then we understand pretty much everything about the way that person interacts with the world. So if as the coach, the practitioner, when I say practitioner, I don't just mean practitioner level. I mean, at whatever level of NLP training you have, you are a practitioner of NLP. That's what you practice. So whether you're a coach or a practitioner, if you can kind of insert yourself in between the client's reality and the outside world, and you can understand and decode how they are interpreting, how they're making meaning from that through that interface, then we understand pretty much everything that there is to know about that client, how they're going to behave in certain situations. And so, for example, one of the common things that happens when I'm doing metamodel analysis with a client is they'll give me some information, and in order for me to test my understanding of the structure, I'll test that out in different scenarios, and I'll say to them, do you find that when you're in meetings at work you behave like this? And they'll say, yes, I do. And I'll say, and do you find that when you go shopping you do this? And they'll say, yeah, how did you know that? Because they're all examples of the same structure. So when we know one thing about the client at the fundamental level, we kind of know everything at the surface level. We can predict any behavior, and therefore we can preempt and help them, most importantly, help them to preempt behavior in certain circumstances, which then allows them to change it.
So how can we, can you give us a few pointers, like, what to look out for in order to understand this, process or model that a person has? Like, what should we look for,
I certainly can, and I'm going to do that by working through a live example, because that's much more interesting than just talking about the theory, isn't it? So, between you and I, if you imagine for a moment that I'm a coach, obviously I am, but for the purposes of this session right now, for this session right now, I'm a conference speaker. I'm not coaching right now, but let's put ourselves in that context that this is a coaching session, and imagine that you're my client. And imagine that we're going to have a coaching session and you're going to tell me about something that would be valuable for you to work on, that you would be happy to talk about just for the next few minutes for the purposes of analysis. So make it something that's kind of depersonal, enough that you're happy with that, and then we can go through a worked example and I can show you exactly what I do. How does that sound?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Great. So if we were to have a coaching session and I was to ask you for an example of something that you would want to work on, that you'd find valuable, maybe something you'd like less of or more of in life, something that would be a valuable outcome for the conversation, what would that be?
Let's say, like for instance, I want to be, how do I say this? I want to be able to share more of the information that I have, like I do now with this event, with this summit, right? It's like, there's so much information. So to be able to do this more on an international level rather than just local in my home country. So kind of like shifting from my local market, so to speak, to an international tribe, from a local tribe rather, I would say, to an international, to a global one. So rather than serving a local community, to serve the global community of people who are interested in learning and growing. So that's my goal basically. Also with this event, that's the goal of this event basically, to make this information available to as many people as possible.
Wonderful. Okay, so I've made a few notes, and one of the most common questions that people ask me is, what notes am I making? Am I writing down everything that you say? And what I find, so I'm going to show you the notes that I've taken. I'm just about to say that. It's not a lot.
Yeah.
It's not everything that you said, because after the fourth time, or maybe the fifth, you repeated yourself a number of times. So what happens is if we think in terms of structure, the clients, whatever the issue is that they want to work on or change, so there's something in here that you want to change, which is moving from the local to the global audience. And so learning always involves change, and change always involves learning. And change doesn't mean do something different, it means have more choice. The generative aspect of NLP isn't about what you're doing is wrong, do this instead. That would be totally antithesis to NLP. That's not generative. So, for example, when trainers teach swish, common thing I see when trainers teach swish is, here's the behavior you don't want, and then we're going to change that for a behavior you do want. That's not generative. That's just wiring a different habit that seems better right now, but in a different context is going to be just as unuseful, because the fundamental problem is always lack of choice. So somebody says, oh, I hate spiders, I'm scared of spiders. What do you want instead? I want to be okay with spiders, I want to like spiders. It's not realistic. Why would anybody want to like a spider? They're horrible things. But have choice. So you're acting from choice in that situation. So change isn't about, instead of this, do this. Change is always about have more choice available, more awareness of what's going on.
So like do this or this or this or this or the other.
Right. So moving local tribe to global isn't about there's anything wrong with a local tribe. It means adding some extra capability, adding some choice. And what will happen is, as soon as the client starts thinking about the thing that they want to work on, they will start mentally rehearsing what they're going to say. And as soon as they start mentally rehearsing what they're going to say, they're accessing that symbolic map that I was talking about. They're replaying experiences. In other words, they're getting themselves into a state via a number of anchors, which are going to be the memories that they're thinking of, what they want to say, how they want to say it. And as they're replaying that, they're getting themselves into the state that's associated with the thing that they want to change. That's why the client will actually be telling you everything you need to know before they open their mouth.
Nice.
Because they are already acting out the program of behavior. Program is as in neuro-linguistic programming, a pattern of behavior. They are already acting that out before they open their mouths. And so the first question that you ask them is, it doesn't have to be clever, it just has to get them talking, because at that moment they will start playing out what they mentally rehearsed. Now with us it's a little bit different, because you weren't starting this conversation thinking you're going to have a coaching session, and so I had to give you a little bit more of a setup. But as a minimum, you can just say to the client, speak, or what do you want to tell me, and just press the play button and they will start unloading what they've been rehearsing. They've already been acting that out. How they walk into the room will have structural similarity. One of the things my wife does is she reads tarot cards for people. And there's a lot, and so she's done my master practitioner training, and she uses a lot of metamodel analysis in the way that she reads cards for people. And so when people used to come to the house in the old days when we had, visitors, she was asking me, how can I find out more about them before we sit down and they tell me what their question is? And I said, well, as they come in through the front door, they'll tell you everything you need to know. Because in our old house, just inside the front door, there was a rack of shoes. Mm-hmm. And so when people come in, do they see the shoes? If they do they automatically take their shoes off? Do they ask if they should take their shoes off? Do they ask if they wanted to take their shoes off? Do they ask if they have to take their shoes off? The modal operators they use, the language they use. All of these things will tell her everything about what kind of a person they are. And so one of the neat things that we can do in coaching is we can set up little tests like this that provoke the client to run the program, to give us the information. So we already know what we're doing before they even open their mouths. So when I asked you, and I gave you a bit more of a setup because you weren't expecting this, you said then you scratched your head. Let's say you did something like this. And I think the interesting thing about doing this via video is the people watching at home can rewind and look at what happened. You said, I like, for instance, I want to be. So it was this sort of gesture. I want to be able to share more of the information I have, local, tribe to global. You said that a few times. About people being interested, as many people as possible. So the pattern was this expanding the audience, share information. But you said that over and over and over again. I lost count of how many times, maybe 8, 10 times. You did the same thing.
We'll have to watch the recording.
Right. And the first time you did it was So that was the first time we got the pattern. So, and then it came a number of times. Now what happens is if, this is a really important tip for doing analysis with Metamodel. Before we dive in and start, there's a nominalization, there's an unspecific. Before we dive in and start looking at words, let's take a step back and look at the overall pattern. The overall pattern was repetition of the same pattern. When we get repetition, that means we're moving forward and then we hit an obstacle and we bounce back. We move forward, we hit an obstacle, we bounce back. And that gives the effect that the person is going around in circles. So, what the important thing is, and again here's a handy tip for doing this fast in conversation, because another question that I get asked a lot is, how can you do this real time? How can you do this analysis so fast? Mm-hmm. And the simple answer is because there'll be a central pattern that's driving the behavior, and that pattern will manifest in everything the person does and says. So it doesn't matter whether we go for the nominalization, for example, the word information, or tribe. It doesn't matter whether we go for the unspecified verbs. It doesn't matter whether we go for an unspecified verb like share, or we could also see that as a forgotten the name of the other pattern. No, it'll come back to me. I've forgotten. So we could see that one in the share as a verb. That could take a couple of different ways that we could look at that. More, a comparative deletion. What's interesting is if we looking at the overall pattern, there's a game that some people might be familiar with. It's been the subject of a British radio comedy show, a quiz show called Just a Minute. It was the longest running quiz show, I think. It's been running since the 1960s. And contestants have a minute to speak on a given subject, and they have to speak for a minute without hesitation, deviation, or repetition. And this is a really fantastic way to think about using Metamodel in real time. So was there hesitation? Was yeah, there was hesitation. And the question we ask in hesitation is, what's causing that? What's happening during the hesitation? When we get words like what's happening is that the brain is making a noise to stop somebody else from speaking, even though there isn't anything to say yet. And you'll find this, for those of you who work in corporations that go to meetings, you'll find people doing what I call jamming. If you think in the sort of radio, military, they'll jam a frequency to stop other people from transmitting. And that's exactly what people will do. They'll sit in a meeting, and as soon as they get a chance to speak, they'll say, I was, the figures for, I was just, it was a really interesting question. I was, and all the time they're just making noise to stop other people talking, but they don't actually have anything to say yet until their brain catches up, and then they get into their question. So that's one of the things that's happening when we get hesitation. Deviation. So did you change the subject? Did you ask? Did you not answer the question? Really common thing I find with coaches: they'll ask a client a question, the client will answer a different question, and the coach will get distracted by the different question and go off in a different direction. And they'll even justify that, and they'll say, oh, well, they kind of answered, or actually what they said was really interesting as well, so this is rubbish.
They answered with what it was actually more important than the question I asked.
Right, they answered the question like a politician that they wanted to answer, not the question that was asked. And if you are a professional coach or change worker or therapist or whatever, you don't make small talk. You ask every question with purpose and intention and with precision. And you cannot move on until the client has answered that question. If you take your car to a garage because there's a problem with the car, and the mechanic says to you, so what, when the car doesn't start sometimes, so have you noticed anything in particular about the times that it doesn't start? Well, that's a really interesting question, you see, because I bought the car a couple of years back, and we've had some lovely holidays in it, and it's great. I love the big boots, and we can just take all the kids' stuff. The mechanic can't do his job until you've answered the question. So it might be very interesting. So when you're coaching, you're asking questions with intent. Until the client has answered that question, you can't carry on. So deviation is a sign that what your question has provoked discomfort. And what will happen is that fear that underpins the behaviour is so fast and so powerful, the client will not even realise it's happened, not even realise they felt it, and they will deviate and change direction. And if you follow that deviation, you're then going away from where you intended to go as a coach. And as a coach, the client is paying you to be in charge, to know what you are doing, to lead the process. And then the final one, repetition. So what has caused the repetition?
Just a quick question here, because you said something, and I just want to clarify on this. So you're saying that every time the client is not answering the direct question you ask about a very particular information, they consciously or unconsciously kind of like trying to run away from that question?
I would say it's unconscious. At that stage, the fear that's driving the behaviour, the pattern, that's causing in this example, the language to loop back, the pattern to loop, is so strong you don't get anywhere near it, and it just gives you the gentlest little nudge, and before you know it, you've changed the subject, nobody noticed, and the conversation went off in a lovely direction, but nothing changed, and the client didn't get what they were paying for.
Right. And then you as a coach or as a practitioner or a therapist, whatever you want to call yourself, you actually have to stay the course and hey, we come back. Here's my question. This is what I asked.
Right. because I asked for a reason, because I need that information, or I
Yeah.
need you to get that information before we can step forward.
Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed when I was asking people is like, what is it that you want? They say, well, I don't want to be unhappy anymore. And it's like, I didn't ask what you don't want.
Exactly.
I asked what you want.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and it's like, I don't know what I want.
Exactly. And the client will do that for all kinds of reasons. They're trying to draw you into the story. They're trying to
Yes.
draw you into their reality, because they're, from their point of view, their reality might not be a nice place to be. So at least
Yeah.
if you're in there with them, that feels better. At least they've got company, which
Alright,
is great,
yeah.
but that's not what they're paying you for.
Awesome. Thank you.
So so we've got the pattern, and we know that the pattern can't move because it's bouncing back off something.
Mhm.
And the structure of language is isomorphic with the person's behavior in the real world. What that means is the pattern will show up both in the structure of language and it will show up in behavior.
Mhm.
So what we got in the pattern of language was a number of repeated attempts to say something, not quite saying it. So in reality, I'm guessing that the pattern that shows up is that you've made a number of attempts to grow the tribe from local to global, and you've felt like something hasn't worked out, and you've kind of retreated back. So this isn't the first time you've done this. Would that be correct?
Yeah, absolutely, totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of mind reading bit. That's the thing that
Yeah.
wow, I never. Because the other thing that we can assume is this is not the first time that the client has had this conversation with somebody. This
Yeah.
is not the first time that this has come up. It's now at the level where it's in conscious awareness, so we can talk about it. So what this is bouncing back off in terms of the structure is to be able to share more of the information I have. That was the first bit where we got a fully formed sentence. Up until then, we had attempts to say that, and then after that, we got repetitions of the same thing.
Mhm.
So we had hesitations before, we had repetitions after, and in the middle, when I asked you what you wanted to work on, something you wanted maybe less or more of, an outcome for the conversation, you said, I want to be able to share more of the information I have. That's the essence of it.
Mhm.
So if we break that down in terms of metamodel analysis, want. Now everybody watching this is going to say, want. It's a modal operator of possibility, and therefore he wants it for himself. This is an No. Want is not a modal operator.
What is it then?
It's a comparative deletion.
Okay.
Because the word want, if we think about what a modal operator is a rule that determines a future action. What we do is we take an action, a verb. A verb is a word that joins together two things
Mhm.
in time. So we take a thing like a person, and we take another thing like a shop, and we say this person is running to the shop.
Mhm.
So the verb describes change over time relative to these two things. And in linguistics, we call these two things the subject, which is usually the person acting, and the object. And every language on the planet has a subject, a verb, and an object in the basic structure of a sentence. And people like Noam Chomsky and Steven Pinker have theorized that there is a fundamental structure in the brain for organizing experience that in language will always come out in that form. Different languages will put some of those in a different order.
Yeah.
Subject always comes first. So some languages we have subject, object, verb. Other languages we have subject, verb, object, but subject always comes first.
Mm-hmm.
And so want is not a modal operator. It's not about taking a future action. It's not about the conditions under which I will do something in the future. It's a comparison. And if we look at the etymology, the origin of the word want means lack. It means I am in want of I lack something, I am missing something. How do you know that you're missing something? Because somebody else has got it.
Okay.
Next.
So is this meaning that I am unconsciously comparing myself to someone else? Is that what you're saying?
I bet, not even unconsciously. I bet you've got books and videos by this person on the shelf in front of you.
Okay.
So
I do have some in front of me, but it's not just one author, it's like several.
several. So you create this either some person, or often some people will have a specific person in mind. Sometimes it will be a hybrid, like a simulation of a number of
principle of.
Right, but there will be a type, like an archetype.
Got it, yeah.
Compare yourself to that person. I want to be able. Think able. That's about ability. That's about capability.
Mm-hmm.
But it isn't. To be is a verb in the infinitive form. That does the same job as a nominalization. A nominalization, a lot of people will say, nominalization, that's a verb stopped in time. So the person's looking at a still picture. Here's a little test, a little game you can all play along with at home. Imagine yourself at a meeting making a decision. And now, wipe that image away. And now, imagine yourself meeting someone deciding. First picture was still, second picture was moving. Right?
Okay.
So a lot of people will say, normalization, that's a picture frozen in time. It isn't. It is not frozen in time. It is taken out of time.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we take an object, like a book, you can't tell what time is passing by looking at the book unless the book is moving, unless somebody's doing something with it. Somebody's reading the book, somebody's buying the book, whatever it might be. And so when we take a verb and we nominalize it, we turn it into a thing, an object, and we remove it from time. Now this object can exist independent of whether time is passing or not. The same thing happens when we put a verb in the infinitive form. In the infinitive form, a verb, to be, to run, to have, to love, to change, is happening always and therefore now.
Right.
Because there is only one time as far as the perception of the mind is concerned, which is now. Past and future are constructed. So I'm missing, somebody else has, to be, nominalization, taken out of time, able to, share. Share is not an action that one person can do by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because in order to share, there must be a giver and a receiver, and something being shared, so something is being divided.
Mm-hmm.
So that means you've still got some, and the person you're giving it to has got some as well. More, as an obvious comparative deletion, that means you're sharing some. More what? We have two different ways of looking at a comparative deletion. We have a comparison to what. So in this case, who is sharing more than you? Or what is the information that you've got that you're not sharing?
Mm-hmm.
We've also got the criteria for the comparison. How do we measure the amount of information that's been shared? Are we measuring it in size of the audience, number of webinars, number of ideas, papers, books written, what? How do we measure the amount of information?
Quality, quantity.
Right. I have. Have is a statement of possession. I have this. It's an unspecified verb. I have the information. There's no clue there about how you got it. So how did this information get in there? So what is the experience? What have you experienced that produces information?
Yeah.
Information is anomalized. To inform. To inform means I'm going to tell you something. So the overall package that we get from analyzing that is you've got a whole load of knowledge that you've absorbed from other people, and what stops you from then passing that knowledge on to other people is that you are not perceiving yourself as being on the same level as the people you learned that knowledge from.
Okay.
So if I am
not on the same level would not necessarily can also be above or below. You know what I mean?
Well, if I put some imaginary names in,
okay.
Let's make up some names of people. Let's make up some self-help guru. Let's call him Tony Roberts, just for the sake of argument. I'm watching Tony Roberts. I'm reading Tony Roberts. He's amazing. I want to do what he does. I've acquired all this information from him and people like him. I want to do what he does, but I can't because I'm not him. So the very source of the information.
Clear that when you're saying not on the same level, actually would mean below that level. That's why I was making that.
Right, and below that level can't exist in objective reality because there's no way of measuring that level. But if we start to put numbers on in terms of number of events or number of participants or amount of money made or something, then we create these artificial ways of quantifying comparisons that don't exist in the real world. You've probably got about the same number of atoms in your body as Tony Roberts. You've got about the same number of neurons in your brain. So just by looking at you, it's very hard to tell the difference. It's only possible to tell the difference when we look at change over time, when we look at relationships and interactions. So paradoxically, the thing that makes you want to share the information is the very thing that's stopping you from sharing the information. So that paradox, but I can't because I'm not at that level, causes you to flip back, try again, try a different angle, and so on. So that's the analysis, and you can see that was really done in seconds, as you were talking. Another tip for people saying, well, for me to be able to do the analysis that fast, that I've got to do a lot of. Well, yes, you do have to do a lot of practice. That is true of anything.
A lot of practice.
Exactly, you got to put a bit of work in. That is true. But also, here's a little tip. Let's say you've made a note of what the clients, you've captured the kind of first bit, but you're thinking, I'm not sure about this. I need to think about this some more. I wish I could take a break and go away and do my analysis and come back. You can, and here's how. So, Eugen, could you give us an example, or could you give me an example of the kind of information that you would like to, that you'd like to share more of?
Well, like even this presentation we have right now, it's the kind of information that I believe that people would benefit tremendously from, and that's why I'm making these interviews and I'm organizing this event so we can get this amazing information to as many people as possible.
Fantastic. That gave me about 20 seconds during which I didn't need to listen to you because you're just running the same pattern, and I could do my analysis. So if you want to buy yourself some time to think, just ask the client, oh, that's interesting, tell me more about that. They'll tell you another story.
Yeah.
You don't have to listen because they're just going to give you the same pattern all over again.
Yeah.
So now you can...
But same intent. Yeah.
Exactly. They'll give you another example of the same thing, which is great because they are demonstrating their mastery of the subject. And the mastery that you've demonstrated here is your mastery of your ability to get all of this information from all of these different sources, to absorb, to find all of these role models, and so much information that it becomes a problem for you to share it. But you're demonstrating great mastery of you having all of that. I think the word share is interesting because sharing if I've got a sandwich, anybody who's seen me before will know my love of influencing people to buy tuna sandwiches. It's a little in-joke of my trainings. I'll talk about sandwiches and say, so when you go to the shop at lunchtime and you get a tuna sandwich, and people come back and they say, I was telling myself I am not going to buy a tuna sandwich, and that was exactly what I bought.
Yeah.
Anyway, so if I've got a tuna sandwich and I give you half, I've now only got half. So to share diminishes what I've got. Now, I'm not giving away there's some social value, or we're friends, or whatever the reason is. It's a fair and equal exchange, but I've still now only got half a sandwich. When you share information, or when you give information, when you inform others, let's take away the normalization. When you inform others, are you losing anything that you know?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Okay. I was saying no, of course not.
So when you inform others, when you have something that you know and you inform somebody, do you lose anything that you know as a result of doing that?
No.
Is it possible that you gain something as a result of informing?
Of course. Yeah.
Can you give me an example of how you might gain?
I mean, it depends on how you know, like. I'm just filling up the noise here, right?
Yeah.
I'm observing myself.
We'll wait.
Right?
That's okay. Take your time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are several layers of being able to gain from doing that. You gain, I don't know, association, popularity, even money by doing so. I mean, there's so much that you can gain by doing so.
Right.
But
maybe there even comes a discussion, and from the act of discussing the idea, some new idea is generated.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, there are so many levels of gaining by giving the information and getting back feedback from the receiver of the information.
Right. So if we're to shortcut this whole process, my advice to you, if I can offer it, is stop sharing information. It's a really bad idea.
What?
Informing.
Okay. All right.
Start informing.
Yeah, that's generates a switch in the mind, like exactly like you're saying, like the perception of it.
Because once those people,
I'm making connections right now because we have this exchange of information. So the connection is like people who are selling, like stop selling but actually inform, and then people will get what they need and give you whatever they will give you instead. And when you inform people, you're not trying to sell them, you're trying to inform them, and then they do whatever they need to do with the information.
Right, okay. So you're transferring part of your map into another person's mind. It stays in your mind, it doesn't change. And now it's somewhere else as well. So it's multiplying. And so just looking at the language, the things that jumped out from that, I want is a comparison to somebody to be able. So first of all, the repetition. So we're hitting something that's fundamentally scary. So the comparison to somebody else, to be able, the infinitive taken out of time, so it's become the object now, it can't change. To share again in the infinitive form, more comparison to what, well, probably the same comparison that we had at the beginning with want. The information, that's making that an object, nominalizing to inform into information, means now it's going to be diminished as a result of the sharing. I have an unspecified verb, so we don't know how that knowledge got in there in the first place. How it got into you is probably the same way that it's going to get out again to somebody else. And there's probably something connected in that around the comparison. So does this always mean that as a result of the analysis, I'm going to come up with a really fantastic, clever, conversational intervention? It can do. It can do. And it can be as simple as a couple of words that just happen to fit the pattern and break the pattern. That could be possible. But I think a really, really important point is that's not always the best approach anyway. I think one of the harmful things that's said about NLP is it's instant, fast change, it's amazing. Because yes, right, can we change a client's mindset, behavior in one session? Yes. Can they then use that to change their reality in the outside world and the relationships and routines as a result of that one session? Unlikely.
Why is it so?
Imagine, I guess a lot of people watching at some point will have been on a time management course. training course through work. So you go on a time management course and they teach you all these great techniques, spend the first half hour of your day planning your agenda. When people give you stuff to do, don't react, put it on your to-do list, prioritize by urgent, all these great, it's all fantastic, it's great stuff. The very next day, you'll go back to the office, you'll sit down, within 5 seconds of being at your desk, there'll be emails, post-it notes on your screen. Oh, I need this by lunchtime, I need this. All of those ideas, you'll go away from the course saying, wow, there's some really good ideas there. I'll try and find time to use them. And you never, ever will. And by lunchtime the next day, you'll have forgotten all the stuff you learned. Because the training did nothing to change the system that you built around yourself. So those people know to come to you and say, I need this by lunchtime, I need this by today, I need this right now. They know to do that because you've taught them to do that. For example, because when you're reactive and responsive, it makes you popular, makes you look like a team player, makes you
somebody can be counted on.
Yeah, you can exactly be counted on. Somebody knows how to get things done. Somebody's responsive, and you've taught them that because you've learned that that's what's valued in that culture.
Yeah.
So you teach people to expect ridiculous timescales and deliverables from you. And then you're surprised when they expect you to deliver that. You've taught it to them. So that sort of training, just teach great stuff. But it's tips and systems that can't work because the most important thing is create space to make them work. And so if I'm doing something like that, I'll say to people, right, the first thing you've got to do when you get back in the office is make a sign and put it on your desk that says, I will, please write your requests on this form, and if you if you demand something instantly, then you need to put some money in this pot that I'm collecting for charity or something. Or go back and say, listen everybody, I need your help. I've just been on the time management training. I'm going to be doing some things differently, and the intention is it's going to make me more efficient and better able to serve you. Will you help me to put in place some of the systems I've been learning about? Nobody in their right minds would say, no, I'm not going to help you. Every time that's ever...
But you will still mess up with their habit of pushing your buttons.
Right. But at least you're given a chance to implement, and you're starting to recognize the impact of the system. This is what we mean when we talk about systemic change. It isn't about changing the person. That's easy when they're sitting in front of you. Go and try and coach them when they're at their desk and there's a queue of people coming and demanding stuff for them, and their phone's ringing, they get emails coming in. Try and coach them then. If you got that person for half an hour, nice, nice, quiet, comfy room. Oh, let's reflect on your time management practices. Yeah, of course you're going to affect change. It's undone the moment they walk out the door.
Yeah. This actually is happening to me right now because for many years I've been like a man of many hats or whatever, how do you say that? I was wearing many hats. That's the expression. Yeah. I was doing everything, chat support, website, calls, sales, teaching, everything, And now I'm actually moving away from that. So people are still sending me messages. This doesn't work, or this is not. I said, email. And it's like I'm like a broken record. Send email. Don't write to me personal messages. I don't want to do that anymore. And it's a difficult process. Like, this is a work in progress because like every single day I have to tell people, send emails, don't send me private messages.
Right.
Because I've been doing this for so many years.
So it's really interesting how you used the word trying and then corrected yourself, because again, something a lot of trainers will say is, try means that you'll fail. So you say trying, it means you're not going to do it. You say, try to go to the party, you've got no intention of going, you're lying. It's rubbish. Try is not a negation, and but is not a negation. They are exceptions. Try actually means, so another little game for you to play along with at home. Imagine yourself opening a door, and now imagine yourself trying to open a door. So when you imagine trying to open the door is neither open nor closed. You are in the middle of the process of opening it. You're going, it's a bit stiff, or the lock isn't working, or it's stuck, or
Yeah.
it's neither closed nor open. So when a person says they're trying, what they're imagining is the inside of a sequence of events. They're not at the beginning, they're not at the end. So when you talk about trying to do it, it means you are doing it, and you're in the process of doing it, and you're not where you'd like to be.
Nice, I like that. Very nice distinction.
So there are some measurements to be introduced there that would be valuable. And when people say but, that's a negation, because somebody says I like you, but everything before the but. No, it's an exception. What it means is when you hear the word but, what comes next is an exception, which means that what came before the but was a generalization.
Beautiful.
And why do people generalize? Because it's a mental shorthand, it's a shortcut to simplify, make it grouping together lots of bits of information.
And I want to ask you one more question about the trying versus doing. Have you noticed that when people say I'm trying, are they more associated or dissociated in the process of trying?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I would have to hear a specific example to
For instance, when you're
that.
saying open a door or try to open the door, for me, opening the door was more dissociated, and trying, hold on a second, was it like, no, the other way around. Opening the door was associated, and me trying is like I could see myself there trying to open the door, like it was a work in progress, opening the door.
Interesting, because when I imagined myself trying to open the door, I saw my hand on the handle, so I was associated. So that'd be an interesting thing for people at home to think about. Were you associated or dissociated? Because if you're dissociated, if you can see yourself in the image, and this is one of the interesting things we get in metamodel analysis, when we hear things like dissociations, distorted referential index, dissociation and seeing yourself in the picture, logically that is a picture that you can never have seen in your life, and therefore it must be a construction, and therefore it must take the form of something that you have got from somebody else. You've heard somebody else say, somebody else has said to you, you've watched somebody else doing, and you're projecting yourself into them. There's one of the things that a lot of NLP trainers talk about is mirror neurons, and they'll talk about them in the context of rapport and empathy. Something far more interesting is happening as well. There's a really fantastic TED talk from a Dutch anthropologist, and it's about morality and ethics in animals. His name is Frans de Waal, and you can look him up on YouTube. Fantastic video about basically the origins of morality and ethical behaviour in all kinds of different animals that have been researched since the 1950s that show what they call pro-social behaviours, moral and ethical behaviours that take care of each other and share food and things like that. And so the role of the mirror neurons isn't just I'm going to watch you do something and copy it myself and reproduce what I see you doing within my motor cortex, so I act and feel emotionally the actions that I see from you. Also, to flip that around, it allows you to put yourself in somebody else's mind. And from this we get something called the simulation theory of mind reading. And there's been all sorts of interesting experiments into mind, the nature of the mind, and animals having intelligence and social intelligence, being able to mind read, basically. Animals, birds, being able to predict what another animal is going to do and then act based on that prediction. In order to do that, you must simulate the mind of another inside your own. And so one of the common patterns we will analyse with Metamodel is mind reading. And in a mind read, we say, oh, well, the person's acting as if they know what somebody else is going to say. No, the other person is placing that idea into their simulation of the other person's mind. I'm not acting as if you like me. I'm making you like me in my map of the world. Because I know what's in your head. And so it isn't I'm acting as if I know what's in your head. I actually do know what's in your head, because your head is inside my head. And that's an interesting idea
It's
to
a
get,
mindbender right there.
isn't it? Isn't it? I only exist in your mind as far as you're concerned because everything only exists in your mind.
Yeah.
And you will put whatever you want in your reality. You will put into your reality whatever you want to be there. So if you want to see me as whatever, nice, interesting, whatever, you'll do that because that's what you are looking for. That's what you've decided. And so I think the idea of the old idea of metamodel violations causes people a lot of trouble. I think there's a violation that it must be corrected. For example, somebody says you when they mean I. Well, you know what it's like, and you don't like to ask, do you? Yeah. And the coach or the trainer says,
"You wouldn't go and do that, would you?"
Right. So the coach or the trainer forces them to make it I. You must own that statement. You must take ownership of what I don't like what I'm. You mean you? It's rubbish. They meant what they said. They meant you don't like it. You don't want to say, do you? They meant that. It wasn't a mind read. It was an instruction. We could call it a hypnotic command. Because if you watch the effect of this in a normal conversation, one person will say, well, you don't want to say, do you, when it's like that? And the other person goes, no, you're right. Yeah, I know what you mean. And they agree. They've drawn that person into the reality. So it's what I call a normalizing statement. It's saying, if you agree with my map of the world, that makes me normal. And so distortions are an example of this. Somebody who's afraid of spiders. They say, oh, the spider's huge. And other people say, oh, you're stupid and the spider's only that big, what's the matter with you? It's, from the point of view of response to behaviour, if a spider that big walked into the room, we would all scream and jump on chairs. That would be normal. So if the person sees the spider, they react to that, they then feel self-conscious about their reaction because nobody else is doing it, or other people are saying, what's the matter with you? You're pathetic and it's silly and whatever. They will normalise that. They can't change the picture that's in their heads, but what they can do is convince other people to join it. They can say, oh, it's that big, and oh, yeah, it's massive, and oh, it's looking at me, and ooh. People aren't afraid of what the spider is. They're afraid of what they imagine the spider is going to do.
Yeah.
So when we're doing the swish, what we're swishing isn't the spider as is. We're swishing the imagined picture of something that has never happened, but somebody has told them could happen.
Yeah. Like, for instance, people are not afraid of necessarily closed spaces as what would happen if they are in such a space, or they're not afraid of heights,
right?
But what would happen if they fall?
Right, exactly. Nobody's afraid of flying. Flying's the normal bit. Flying's the thing it's supposed to do. That's all right. What people are afraid of is falling out of the sky, screaming in a ball of burning wreckage. That's what they're afraid of.
Yeah.
Has that ever happened? So I worked with a guy who was afraid of flying. I said to him, could I just check the obvious thing? I said, what exactly is it you're afraid of? Because flying's normal. He said, I'm afraid of dying. I said, right, okay. Can I just check the obvious? Because, it's important. We've got to rule out the obvious. Have you ever actually died in a plane crash? He said, no. So then how do you know it's possible? He said, well, I've seen it in movies. Right, those accurate documentaries of real. You've seen it in. Nobody's ever seen a plane crash, but people have seen lots of them in movies, which is dramatized. Like people have a car crash. People drive because they're afraid, in a fearful, anxious way because they're afraid of having an accident, because they've watched Fast and Furious or something, and they think, if you hit another car, the car will explode and burst into flames and it will cartwheel. If you've ever had an actual car crash, it's really uneventful.
Yeah,
it just like
crump. Never explodes right there when you have it.
You hit another car and it's like crump. That's it.
So anticlimactic,
It is. And after that, then what's happening is your hippocampus replays that experience in order to desensitize the brain, so that if that happens again, You're no longer reacting from instinct. Your neocortex gets involved, and you're better able to think, stay rational, stay in control, and think, what do I need to do? How do I avoid this? Whatever. So you're less likely to panic. So the hippocampus will replay that experience. And we could call it a traumatic experience. All it's doing is replaying anything that deviates from expectation. Mm-hmm. So you have a life experience that's different to your map, a little bit, like a conversation with somebody who didn't go how you wanted it to. You'll go away and you'll think, oh, they should have said this. Oh, I should have said that. Oh, they shouldn't have said this. And in a day, you'll have forgotten about it. You have an experience that deviates a lot from your map.
Is a deviation from the normal expectation.
From the expectation, because what your brain is doing is predicting forwards in time. I know what's about to happen. Mm-hmm. Your brain has two fundamental systems of connecting with the outside world, which are in competition with each other. One is a reactive system, but it's always late. And one is a predictive system, but it's always wrong. And in negotiating between the two, we just about managed to get through life with a few surprises. And it didn't taste how I like it though, and that's kind of weird, but I kind of like it. No, I'll have another one. You know,
my instant reaction to this is we are fucked.
Because you can't get through life from the reactive system, because by the time you're aware of something that's happened in the world, it already happened about a second ago. And your predictions are always wrong, like weather forecasts. But on a short enough time frame, like a prediction system is really great for you catching a ball or dodging a car when you're crossing the road. It's really bad for predicting what another human being is going to do. Because while you're trying to predict what they're going to do, they're trying to predict what you're going to do. And these are all these things that I'm talking about are all aspects of this interface with the outside world. And so to come back to the theme, the meta model will tell us all of this. It will tell us how is this person's interface to the outside world functioning. Mm-hmm. And so to come back to the worked example with you, it's functioning by enabling you to gather knowledge, but as soon as you've got that knowledge from somebody else, that relationship then stops you from passing that knowledge on to others, which is exactly what they want you to think.
Yeah.
Because Tony Robbins doesn't want any competition. So they structure the learning experience in such a way that you don't learn anything from it. Well, you learn stuff, but it stops you from doing what they do, because that would be counterproductive for their business. So we've got that to contend with. This information isn't coming neutrally. It's not coming without strings attached. Exactly. Thank you. And so your skill and your ability in absorbing that knowledge from all these different role models, and then packaging it in a way that then enables you to inform something new to other people, that's a fabulous gift. But it's and that the knowledge that you're informing is a fabulous gift, a gift that you get to keep. As well as having others access it as well, because remember that these people we're talking about are in the information property business, and one thing that anybody who's in the IP business will do is protect their IP.
Yeah.
They'll protect it through lawyers and copyright infringement lawsuits, but they'll also protect it by using the very mechanisms that we are talking about to limit you. And so the lie of the self-help industry, which is you can have whatever you want, and the question that drives that, what do you want, is not asking you what do you desire, it's asking you what do you lack, what is missing. And it's focusing you on the absence, and that's drawing you back around in circles, trying to fill a gap that wasn't there until somebody told you it was. That, for me, is antithesis to the spirit and the practice of NLP.
Beautiful. I like it. It's so mind-opening, so to speak. To play with the metaphors here. It's a completely different perspective on and like you said, and I also mentioned this many times when I'm teaching, if you would actually know the meaning of the words you're saying and using in your, day-to-day life, you'd be amazed what your mind says without you knowing.
Exactly, yeah. And this is the weirdest thing, that people will say, as I said earlier, wow, that's amazing. You've said the exact thing that's been going around in my head, and I've never said that to another person. Yeah. And I think, you said that exact thing to me 2 minutes ago. That's why I wrote it down. You said it. But they'll have no memory of saying it. Because while they were saying it, they were a different person. They were running a different simulation.
But you also explained it, which is a completely different, you're saying it unconsciously, therefore, without being totally aware of what you're saying. It's kind of like you turn on the TV and whatever comes, that's on TV, that's what's on TV. Whereas what you're saying is, by doing this consciously, when you turn on the TV, it's going to be on TV whatever you put to be there on TV, which is a completely different perspective.
Exactly, yes. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So I think there's lots of common misconceptions around Metamodel. I think that I've tried to uncover some of those, or even to simplify some of the ways of thinking about it. And it does take practice. One thing that I used to do, and that I always encourage my students to do, is every day just pick a pattern.
Yeah.
Whether you've got a website or whether you've got a book. I mean, my Master Practitioner students get the Master Prac manual, but that's available to buy as well. Mm-hmm. And in that there's my best current attempt. It's always evolving at kind of unpacking and understanding Metamodel. And just every day, just pick one pattern.
Yeah.
And if you're just overhearing somebody's conversation in a cafe, or you're in a meeting at work and it's a bit boring and you want to entertain yourself, just pick one pattern and listen for it. Yeah, and it's very much like listening to music, because you have to get your ear attuned to be able to hear certain things. And once you do that, you'll find it much easier to pick things up. And just to reiterate a point I made earlier, you've got so much information from somebody, where do you start? If you've got that much information, you've got too much. You took you tried to gather too much of what they were saying. You went past the pattern and you kept on going. So that's the first thing, is if you're finding it overwhelming, you've probably got too much information anyway. Second, we could start with any part of the language or the behavior. We could start with any structure. We could start with the modal operators or the unspecified verbs, or the lost performatives. I finally remembered what the name of the pattern was. Or the subordinate clause. We could start anywhere. It doesn't matter. They're all generated from the same underlying pattern, so they all lead us to the same place. So start whichever one with whichever one jumps out at you first. Start with whichever one is easiest to spot, and work from there. And buy yourself time. It's okay. If you're coaching, your client is paying you to know what you're doing. They're paying you to do a professional job. That involves taking time to think about what you're doing. It's okay to do that. You don't have to come back with smart questions and, so what would it be like if you woke up to... No. Stop and give yourself time to think. That's what a professional does. Don't put yourself under pressure. And another thing that I do is I involve the client in the analysis, particularly if they're coming to me as a result of videos they've seen or a book that they've read. And they're interested, they're coming to me because they want me to help them kind of analyse and unpack what's going on for them. I'll involve them in the process. Yeah. And then that makes it easier for me, because they'll spot things that I don't spot. Or they'll add a bit more information, or I'll see responses as we're going through it, and that buys some time. So there's lots of different ways that you can make this easier for yourself. And I think when people see me doing the analysis in real-time conversation, they can be a bit daunted by that, but as I've explained, there's lots of tricks that I'm using to make life easier for myself.
Peter, again, thank you so much for everything, and I'm looking forward to connect with you again in the future.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking to you and everyone today. I've enjoyed it immensely, and thank you everyone for tuning in.